Welcome to Nerds and Friends. Today we have Jason Kiefer joining myself and Carey DuVal on the podcast.
Howdy.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for coming on.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, let's jump right in. Tell us about your writing. Tell us about your recent books you got out there. Let's dive right in.
I have one book out. I'm a new author. I actually
congrats.
just got started. My kids grew up, so I decided I was going to start taking this a little more seriously. So I put out my first novel. I'm working on book 2. Maybe you can see in the background my cover art's hanging on my wall.
Oh, that's awesome. What's the book called?
It's called Death, actually.
Ooh.
Book 1 of the Justice Cycle.
Okay.
So it's a paranormal urban fantasy. I'm enjoying it. Working on book 2 right now. So if I was working on book 2 before the podcast, I'll be working on it again after.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Set in modern day New York State, actually upstate New York, where I'm from. So it kind of picked my own little town here and centered it here. So the first book kind of takes place up here, which is kind of fun for people that live here. They're all, that have read it are all like, oh, wow, I love seeing different areas that we come from and different places that we know. And, oh, I remember that. And that was cool. And I can picture it because I can see that. So it's kind of fun. It gives you kind of a feel for what it's like to live up here.
That's so cool. Yeah, my dad's from Jamestown, New York.
Okay.
So I've been there quite a few times. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's awesome.
I live in Greene, which is about 20 minutes north of Binghamton right now.
Okay.
All right.
That's awesome.
The Mohawk Valley. I was born in Ilion, so it's from that area. So yeah,
that's really cool.
Thing.
No, that's a really cool setting, and that must be so gratifying to have people who live nearby be like, I get exactly what you're talking about.
It is. It is. They're like, wow, this was so much fun, but even more fun because it's our hometown, and we can see these places that you're talking about in our heads and picture them because we've been there. So I'm like, yeah, I'll be driving with friends. I'll be like, I killed somebody there. I killed somebody over there.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
It's fun when you live that has set pieces like that. And especially if you can really dig into like some lore. Speaking of which, like what made you decide on like an urban dark fantasy for your area? Like what was the culmination of this idea?
Well, honestly, growing up with my friends, reading comics, wanting to write comics. Originally it was a comic book character that I created. I just tend to lean towards the paranormal. So this character just kind of came to being out of my imagination, and so then when I got older and decided I wanted to write my first novel, I've written 15 million half novels, tried everything from, sci-fi to high fantasy, which it was what I tended to read. So I decided to pick this character because I kind of knew it. And then I just set him up here because I know that. I think the more you know an area, particularly when my first book, it was like I knew this area, I knew these people kind of, so it was easy for me to kind of write in this area. And I don't know if you're born or upstate New York is probably one of the most haunted areas in the world. It's everything's so old here. Nothing's new really here. So there's tons of history. And just growing up with that, having my own paranormal experiences growing up, it just kind of, this is kind of what I lean towards, and it's like, all right, you know what, I'll take a branch into this. And I'm fascinated with serial killers. I'm not a serial killer, but the psychology of it and what makes one, I actually work with developmentally disabled people and they're criminals, pretty much developmentally disabled criminals. So dealing with people who have been diagnosed with psychopathy, for instance, and different things, but yet they're not serial killers. So the fascination of what drives somebody to become a serial killer, are they made, are they driven? And so you kind of catch a lot of that in this. There's in my opinion, and being a Christian as well, there's a supernatural element to it. So I cover that a lot, and I kind of wanted to delve into that, like more so than just what's evil, but what drives somebody to become evil. So that's one of the main characters, the main villain. It's kind of his story. Like, what is it internally to him that's kind of driving him towards that? And so I enjoyed that a lot. And then it just, of course, the war between angels and demons and the supernatural, and it's fun. And then, of course, the character justice is that there are these two sentient swords that have existed since the beginning of mankind. One is the spirit of justice, one is the spirit of injustice, and they take on bearers, and these bearers become the avatars of justice and injustice. So it's the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. So you've got
I'm looking at your cover art right now, and that's that sword's pretty metal. Like that's definitely like graphic novel worthy. I dig the design, man.
The actual visualization, Jamie Glover, my cover artist, when I had told him, I sent him my description, and then he made that for me, and I was like, that's amazing. Like, I love that. That's exactly what I envisioned. This wrought iron looking black blade. So
yeah, I love a good artist collaboration. One of our other co-hosts is also an artist, and I'm sure that was just
he just did the cover of my latest book.
Oh wow, I like that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Will Shaw. Everyone listening, follow Will Shaw Art on Instagram. Will
Shaw Arts.
Yeah, and Twitter.
And Twitter. I had the same handle. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So this is sorry to jump in again, but I am also a big fan of the paranormal, serial killers, and the like. I'm a huge fan of Last Podcast on the Left, for instance, as far as like a podcast on that goes, which is a lot of comedy. But I like, you were talking upstate New York, and I was thinking about all the different kinds of high strangeness that go on up there, because you had like the Hudson Valley Triangle as far as like a UFO, or like I was curious what your experiences were.
Wow. Well, I mean,
if you're comfortable talking about it,
it's not that I'm not comfortable. It's just I don't, people think you're crazy. I guess there's kind of comes a point in time in your life where you have to accept either you're crazy or this stuff is real. And I think that's kind of what having grown up in a Christian home, obviously my belief is going to lean towards that. So having experienced angels and demons from a young age, that's kind of been my experience as far as experiencing those things, not only personally and encountering them, like waking up in the middle of the night and having a demon sitting on your bed, or having things move across the room, or some, what I'm saying, or lights mysteriously going out, or things of that nature. And then of course dealing with that in other people when you're as a minister, you're dealing with people and you're praying with people and having supernatural experiences happen there. And I wouldn't say demonic possession, because we don't really, the concept of demonic possession, as far as the world tends to think about it, or
like its depiction in
Hollywood. Hollywood's depictions are not quite right in a lot of ways. It's more of an it's more of I like, did you see the was it the Emily Rose one? I think
Exorcism of Emily Rose.
Yes. Which of course is based on a true story, but that's very similar in a lot of ways. But that's like an extreme demonic possession, if you would. But it's more of which I actually talk about in the book.
Oh, cool.
Because there's a demon that he influences people, and so the main character is killing people or having to kill people that he's like, wait a minute, they're just being controlled. And so there's this whole conversation with him and an angel about how there's really not that there's no such thing as possession, but there's no such thing as possession in the way we kind of concept it. Nobody's really made to do anything.
That was my question to you, is as a Christian and dealing with these characters who are driven to do terrible things, like where does free will play in? And I was curious what your opinion is on how it relates to, if someone is being pulled with these greater forces, where free will plays into that. I'd love to hear more about your opinions on that. Okay.
So we have a lot of discussions in the book about that. It's subtle. Cool. I'm not preachy, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I like to really approach the story and these concepts from the character's point of view in a subtle way, like just them having their own realizations or vital, that's like, wait a minute, I'm dealing with this, or, is the serial killer who was a Christian and raised in a Christian home and raised in a pastor's home, was he always evil, or was he driven to be evil? Is it something that he had no choice in the matter? Because he allowed evil in at a young age, but the truth is he did have a choice. And that's, why I say possession, from what we understand possession, and I deal with people who have OCD, who have obsessive compulsive disorder, and they're developmentally disabled, and they can't help themselves, and things of that nature. And how much of a level is this? How much of this is something you can't help, and how much of this is something you can help? And
like management versus like management of something that you can't control, but it's your responsibility to manage it, versus like not being able to do that. To go back to serial killer stuff, not to cut you off, but like that's what you get with a guy like Richard Chase, who he was the Sacramento vampire, and he was deeply schizophrenic.
Yes.
And the problem was that he kept going to mental institutions, but his caretakers, who were his parents at the time, kept weaning him off of medication because they didn't need it.
Absolutely.
And so that's really interesting that your characters get to have like a dialogue about that and kind of like discuss ideas in a rounded way.
It's interesting because that's what it's the heart of it is. Like, what is justice? What is evil? The main character at one point is having an existential crisis on some level. Like, am I just an executioner for the universe? And it's, have I been correct? I don't want to get too much into how he becomes justice, because that's part of the story, and it will give away a major twist of the story.
Of course.
But just like, have I become nothing more than just this executioner for the universe? And what is justice? Because in my sensibilities, killing a 17-year-old kid is not justice, yet the 17-year-old kid shot a gas station attendant and murdered her. You know what I'm saying? But in his mind, it's like, but he's a 17-year-old kid, but to the sword, he's a murderer. You know what I'm saying? So there's this constant interplay with, what is justice, and is mercy? Should justice be merciful? Because I can't remember who said it. He said justice without mercy is evil or demonic. And so there's a lot of play in that, and that's going to come more into play as the story goes on. Obviously,
that's
there's
fascinating.
a bit of that here, but it comes even more so with this interplay with this sentient sword and this bearer who's forced to bear it. And there's this interplay, and the bad guy's kind of like, oh, I love being bad, so I like my sentient sword, so I'll do whatever it wants because I like being bad. So there's this kind of like connection to them, and these two are like fighting with each other. Like, wait a minute, I don't want to do that, and you're making me do that. It's like, so and it's and he has no choice in the matter. It's not like he can just go, you know what, I don't want to do this. He can't, and so it's like, you're chosen, you're it. It shows you're screwed. It's like, whether you like it or not, you're it. And so having to deal with this is something that's fascinating. And then the other main character, again, I won't get too much into it because it'll give away a slight twist. I mean, it's not like I really hide it, but the other main villain, who is the serial killer, who has been possessed in a way by a spirit, which you will find out more and more as the story goes on, what that spirit is. But was he always that? Did he choose to be that? Is it something that because he was influenced from a young age, did he really have a choice? And so we talk a lot about that in there, that in my personal opinion, obviously, I mean, I deal with people who have obsessive compulsive disorder. I deal with people that do horrible things. And some of them, in their minds, it's so compulsive to them. But do they have a choice? And I think that's kind of, I believe you do, honestly. I don't believe in full-on possession necessarily in the way that the movies tend to make it, because you look at the Gabriel demoniac, and he was possessed by 1,000 demons when he says, we are legion, and he would throw himself in the fire, and they chained him into the in the cemetery, and when Jesus stepped on the shore, he broke his chains and ran and fell at Jesus's feet. Now, it's obviously not what the demons wanted him to do. So this guy was possessed by 1,000 demons who couldn't control himself, would throw himself in the fire. When Jesus showed up, he made a choice. And he's like, you're not going to control me anymore. I'm going to fall at his feet. And because I know he's got the answer. So I think on some level, you can be so obsessed with what the spirits are telling you and what this demon is telling you and what you're evil. Any serial killer, you study serial killers, so it starts with an obsession. It starts with a fantasy and then eventually that fantasy is no longer enough, and then you have this overwhelming desire to do something. You do it and you feel like, wow, for a minute, and then that goes away and that comes back again. It's never satisfied. Well, I feel like demonic possession is very similar in a lot of ways, or demonic influences on people. It's not just it's not just a matter of you wake up one day and the devil's telling you what to do, like the devil made me do it, but it influences these subtly, and it goes through time, and it takes a lot of time, and eventually you're obsessed with whatever it is that you're stuck on, whether it be murdering somebody, whether it be not eating, whether it be that you are possessed, and you're so obsessed with this you can't let go of it anymore. And I think that's kind of my personal view of that. But so.
And it's that long sliding slope into a concept like that. Josh, did you have a question?
I'm curious. I mean, because like I'm an atheist, so my question is like, just to play devil's advocate, which is a funny term in this one, is like, if the spirits can tempt someone, because I really like that you acknowledge free will, and it's not like, I take issue with that in the movies or in other depictions where it's like, oh, the devil made someone do it, they can throw all their responsibility on this external entity. And so I like that free will plays into everything, but like, how does God give alternatives if there is this benevolent God? How are they pulling people in the opposite direction? If the spirits are pulling in one direction towards evil, what is God doing? I'm just curious what your views are on that.
Oh, well, obviously I believe God is also working. He works differently. I mean, obviously as a Christian, we have a basic Christianity is that, man fell and they were separated from God. And so Jesus came, and through Jesus, we are then restored to that relationship with God. So the truth is that there's still fallen people out there. So these fallen people they don't in a way have that connection. So God sends people like me or other Christians into their lives. We're obviously not perfect. We make lots of mistakes, and sometimes we do more damage than we do help. But in a way that's, and I think you always see God moving. I think it was Corey ten Boom who said that even in the concentration camps, she saw the presence of God, and there was light even in that place. And then I think that tends to be my view, is that God will show up, and God will move, but whether you choose to follow that or not. And I think that's where, people can be so obsessed with what's going on, whether it be pain, their own pain, or their own inability to let go of what happened to them, dealing with the people I deal with. A lot of them have been sexually abused. A lot of them have been abused in life. They've lived on the streets, and being able to let go of the psychological and internal spiritual damage that happens from that is hard for people. And that's the kind of thing that the enemy plays on. It's not just I show up and I'm pushing you towards the evil. It's this subtle play on the things that are already internally damaged to you. And those are the kinds of things that God wants to heal, and God tries to help with and sends people to heal you, and or even at some point in time sends his absolute spirit in. And I've had plenty talk to people that have gotten saved over the years, that Jesus showed up to them in the worst point of their life. And, it's like, okay, so why he does to some and doesn't to others, I'm not going to justify God's actions. I'm not God. So I'm not even going to bother try. But because he doesn't need me to defend him. He's God. So, but that's kind of the way, that's my belief from what I've experienced is it's not just like the devil's on one shoulder, the angel's on one shoulder all the time. Through life, things happen to us. We get hurt, we make mistakes. And then the enemy then comes in and continues to kind of push at that wound. And try to keep you in a cycle that is self-destructive. And God wants to help set you free from that cycle. And that's kind of that. And it is, you will see that even more so in the book. I won't lie. In this book, obviously, there's a lot of more of the darker side of things. But as the story goes on, we're going to branch into a little bit more of that, of God showing up or of different things, But yeah, that's kind of my take on it. So that's
that line of logic is fairly interesting when it comes down to from like a psychology perspective. I was looking for the book here, but I don't think I have it. But there's a doctor named Viktor Frankl who was
I've been reading that currently. Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Meaning. Okay, it's a fantastic.
I've heard the
book.
name of the book, but I've never read it.
It's only like 2 hours long if you get it on audiobook, but it's not a very long book. But the fascinating thing about it is it's told half from when this guy was in a concentration camp in northern Italy after trying to flee Germany. But he was already a practicing psychotherapist.
Right.
So his book was essentially destroyed. And one of the ways he kept himself sane was to essentially daily write or tell himself what his findings were in the camp.
Right.
And he's kind of the to really boil it down and to vastly oversimplify what he says in progressive logotherapy, it is you do not have control over anything in the circumstance. You do not have control of what happens to you. The only thing that you have control of is that split second after where you have your reaction. Sure. And that control is something that is also very much fed by your patterns of behavior beforehand, by what has been nurtured into you, what is in your nature, what is. And Viktor Frankl's it's a very good way of breaking it down, because you are looking at something that he is in a situation that is so starkly and unequivocally in every sense of the word evil. Sure. Like when you talk about the concentration camps.
Yes.
And he talks about not just his reaction, but the reactions of other prisoners around them. Right. And there's I've been through Army survival school where you get to go to the evasion and resistance portions, where it's like they're teaching you how to resist interrogation and resist capture. And part of that is actually it's very much baked into that kind of concept of there are these external forces that can be malicious, and they're malicious because they have their own ends, or they're malicious because that is like they want to control you.
Right.
And the important thing to do there is to actually maintain your humanity and your integrity, and keep the faith that the next thing that you do is going to be the right thing. And then also forgiving yourself for doing the wrong thing, because when you don't forgive yourself for doing the wrong thing, that snowballs, and that can snowball very badly.
Internal, matter of fact, I'm covering that in the new book. One of the issues that the main character is dealing with is his inability to forgive himself. So that's causing a snowball effect in some ways with his relationship with the sword, because there's a character that he had kind of hurt in the first book that's reintroduced in the second, and that character is playing on that at one point. Like he's playing on the fact that you feel sorry for what happened, but this character is a monster, so kill it. The sword has a tendency to want to kill everything. So there's a play on that too, where he's finally like, wait a minute, your response is always kill it. Like
when you're a sword, everything looks like something to kill.
I think that's
when you're a hammer, when you're a hammer,
right? It's like, if the thing sees everything you've ever done wrong, and so the character does. He's got black eyes that are. It's like I describe them as dark holes of like a black hole but the darkness can reach out towards you, and he can see everything you've ever done wrong. So every time he looks at somebody, it's like, in a way, I won't lie, I stole a little bit from Rachel Magier, where he saw everybody he looked at, he saw dying. So this character, instead of seeing everybody dying, every time he looks at someone, all he sees is all the horrible things they've done. And it's like, and he can see past, present, future. And so it's kind of interesting, because he's like, how hard is that on a soul to be able to only see in a way everything evil that people have done? It's like you want to you want to see the good, you want to see the light in the world, but he can't anymore. It's like it's all he sees. And so the cycle is actually that when you become the justice bearer, you don't know what's going on. You're almost like, wait a minute, I want my old life back, what's going on? And you kind of fight with it till then you become one with it, and you are justice. And then there's this degradation of your soul, where finally you're like, I can't do this anymore. And at that point, you will then be the injustice character will end you, and then you will move on.
Interesting.
And so
it seems like it's kind of where that responsibility of executing justice is too much for a mortal person.
It is
to take on.
Absolutely. Okay. And that's the point of it. And so on top, but the sword needs to be tempered, because again, everybody needs to die.
Yeah.
So he's got this kind of, in fact, a little bit in book 2, they just had a conversation where he's like, Jared's like, your worldview is pretty narrow. Everything is like black and white with you. And the sword's like, I've existed since the beginning of man and I will exist till the end. And I'll tell you right now, man is only black and white. It's either evil or not. He's like, yeah, whatever. He's like, I think your point of view is a little bit skewed there. Like there's a lot more to man than that. So
yeah, no, that's a fascinating dialogue you have there. That's cool.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's fun.
That's fun.
I'm enjoying writing, and it's something I've been wanting to work on since I was a kid. So it's kind of nice to.
Oh, that's fulfilling.
That's fulfilling to finish the first book, and now, I mean, I have a day job, so for me, it's not a full-time job right now. It's
right.
So I'm a slow writer because I have limited amount of time between
of course.
my job and whatnot. But
to pivot off that, what's kind of your writing process? Because most of our listeners are writers that have full-time jobs other than writing. So right. I know, yeah, it's always fascinating to hear what everyone does to work with that. What do you call it? Scarcity of time.
It is. I try to write on my days off. Okay. For me now, the first book, I really wrote the lion's share of it in between jobs. Okay. So I was able to kind of sit down and write for full time for like 6 months. Oh, yeah. And I loved it. Like I didn't want to go back to work. And so I had moved, my kids grew up. So I moved back to upstate New York and I took a job up here and I was waiting for the job with the state to start. So I had all this free time and I just wrote. And I wrote a short story that got published in Bayonet Books anthology, Storming Area 51. Then I did, a script for a comic book artist friend, and I did a bunch of stuff. And so I was able to get this book finished and edited. But then, you start the job, and my job, because we're so short staffed, we are required to work overtime. Ooh. So I could get done with my work hours and be like, oh, by the way, you got to stay for another 8 hours, so, I'll work 80 hours a week sometimes. So for me, it depends. I just got promoted, so my schedule's slightly different.
Congrats.
Thank you. So that's been a little bit of a help, but for me, I try to write on my days off. But then of course, on your days off, you've got everything else you've got to do. You got to clean your house, go to the store, do everything else you've got to do, get your car fixed. Yeah. But recently what I'm trying to do is just, if I don't get mandated, because then I have just enough time to sleep and go back to work, trying to make it a point to every day write at the same time for an hour. And that's kind of what I'm trying to build a habit of that. Same with exercise, like every day at 8, I'm going to go to the gym. And when I don't get mandated, even on my days off, because I would always do this kind of like, well, I'll write today, or I'll go to the gym today sometime. And then the end of the day and, 5 hours of binging anime later, you're like, oh, I didn't write. Now I'm tired, so it's like, yeah. So I'm trying to break that a bit. And I've seen some real good steady progress with that. So awesome. No, I'm not getting, a couple 100,000 words a week kind of thing, but I'm getting a steady progress in the book. I'm a pantser. Oh, so I found in this book that I need to sit down and actually plot some stuff out because I'm like, okay, the first book was easy. I knew kind of where I wanted to go. This book, I have a basic idea and I'm writing and I'm like, yeah, I don't know where I'm going now. And I'm like, okay, I need to, and I've got two basic, because for me, both this story and the first story and the second story, and even the third story are going to have a plot that's taking place in the normal world and a plot in the supernatural, and they interweave. And so I have an idea of what I want to do in the supernatural, and I kind of have an idea of what I want to do in the regular, but they're not connecting the way I want them to. So it's kind of like I've had to sit down and go, all right, I'm going to have to plot this book out more than I've done before. And that's kind of where I'm at now. It's like, all right, I got to sit down and plot some more.
I think, speaking from personal experience, because my first book, I was kind of starting out pantsing it. And then I had a structure of the main character's kind of his plot, and then also a slow reveal of what led up, like a kind of a flashback. And I would kind of alternate between the flashbacks and then his arc. And so plotting that out helped me a lot. I did that about halfway through the process, and it helped me immensely. So
I'm hoping I did plot, right now I was plotting like 4 chapters at a time.
Okay.
But I feel like there's too much I want to do, because it's human trafficking with vampires, to be honest with you. So I want to cover the human trafficking side of it from the normal standpoint of human trafficking, where you've got these other characters that are dealing with it in the courts and are dealing with it through the police, and then this other characters dealing with the vampire part of it, and so how they intertwine to make it believable. And I've marched against human trafficking. I wrote quite a few papers against human trafficking in college, so I know a bit about it. But I want it to be realistic when you're reading it, because it can be easy to make it goofy, vampire-y, and it is going to be horror vampire-y, but also I want it to be believable so that people can be like, this is really how it happens, and this is really what happens.
Yeah.
And
you want to show the stark inhumanity and evil of it.
Exactly. And that it's not just vampires, humans are horrible too when it comes to this. So you know what
Sadly,
I'm saying?
Yeah. They did back in the 90s, like the first, because the first Blade was like this like, I mean, that was kind of a bat out of hell. I mean, everything like it really hit the tone of like how nuts the comics were. And then you got Blade 2, and Guillermo del Toro is one of my favorite directors, period. But you really got to see like how expansive, essentially, like I think he drew a lot off of like illegal organ farming.
Absolutely.
Look at that. It was insanely creepy in like a really interesting way. That's a super interesting way to approach that particular subject matter, is taking like something that was a legend for a long time, and we are as a culture afraid of it for a reason,
right?
Or as humans afraid of the idea of having our life force drained from us for a reason, right. And like, what is the modern interpretation of that? And it also makes like a really cool logical track of like A to B.
It does, yeah. And that's kind of what I wanted to go for too, and bring attention to human trafficking, just like I'm bringing attention to serial killer. First one, one of the comments, I had an interview with Fairy Tale Access, I think it's called, and she said she was actually scared at night when she was reading the book, and I'm like, I'm going for that. I want it to be horror in a way. I mean, it's supernatural, it's paranormal urban fantasy, and it will become more fantastical as it goes. But I wanted to capture the horror of just how terrible things can be, and how horror, like this is horror, like these things happen. And that's why they are keeping you up at night, is because there's a ring of truth to them, that this person is doing this to you, or this person is doing that to you, to somebody else, or you're finding women dead, and they're and what is the cause of this, and and then you've got one of them is a child's killer, and and he's doing something. I mean, I didn't show him killing the child, but it's kind of the after effect of it. And you're like, okay, it's like, this is horrible, and why did you put that in there?
You don't even need to show it, just the idea of it gives goosebumps.
Exactly.
Like have you seen Mindhunter in season 2?
Yes. I love Mindhunter. I love
great. That soundtrack gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. Ugh.
When they get into the Atlanta child murders, because I love that story, but there's a great podcast called Monster, and they cover that, and I loved the podcast. And I watched the HBO series where they talk about what was kind of the modern. They're still trying to figure out whether the guy they have is the child killer or not, and how it's still contentious to Atlanta, because a lot of these mothers never feel like they got resolution for what happened to their kids. So and in a way, that's kind of what I was going at. The serial killer is a demon who's possessing this guy, but I found this obscure story. It's called the Amiable Child, and there's a grave in New York City over by the Hudson River, right next to the big cathedral there in Grant's Tomb, called the Grave of the Amiable Child. And they actually moved Grant's Tomb because they didn't want to uproot this grave, and it's got a wrought iron fence around, little grave, and apparently there was a child that died there. They didn't know who his parents were or whatnot, and so he's called the Amiable Child, and it's been there for hundreds of years. And so I had I kind of latched onto that and was like, what if there was a demon that was a serial killer, or influencing people to be serial killers to kill children, and this time of year he would kill another child and place the child on the wrought iron fence of the Amiable Child. And so the serial killer's doing this, and to him it's art. I know it's sick, but I'm sorry, they're bad guys. And so the angel who's been kind of fighting this demon forever, who's a main character in the book, shows up and kills him. And there's like a big interaction there with the demons, like, you just killed some dude. I don't think your God would have liked that, you know. It's like, and the angel got angry and just like punched him, and and it was cool. But there's I try to weave in this historical events, actual historical events, and make them supernatural. Very similar to Jim Butcher with what he does with a lot of things in Chicago, where he takes these urban legends of Chicago and weaves them in. And that's what I trying to do more of. Like, I want to kind of bring attention to these actual urban legends and events and kind of weave them into my story where I can. I think it's fun.
I really like how you're always constantly challenging the humanity of what the divine is doing and kind of checking it. I like that a lot. I think that's really cool.
Just because I'm a Christian, I believe in God, doesn't mean that I don't have questions or that I don't. I don't in my way discuss these questions. And you may not agree with my conclusions, but the truth is that that's what these characters are doing, because they're dealing with things. I mean, obviously there's no real sentient swords and stuff like that, and
sadly,
even sadly, and even though I'd be like me, even though the angels and demons aren't quite the way I believe that actually happens, it is fantastical, and it gets more fantastical as it goes along. I give explanations of why vampires and werewolves. I have my own world. I don't want to get too much into it because
you have your own mythology. That's great. Your own
exactly.
Mythology.
So I'm setting a mythology that goes all the way back to the Watchers and the Nephilim and this war for humanity in a way. And so this big, broader war is unfolding that this characters are thrust in, but also then you also have this intimate relationship between the sword and this dude. And it's like in his journey and his own focus, dealing with himself and morals and everything and how he experiences the world. And you begin to see that in this one. I also, in the first book, which I love, I throw the mentor on his head. So the angel is supposed to be his mentor, but he's held up over here. And so there's a joke because he's always late. And so the guy that God sends he's a prophet. But when he was a kid, because God's talking to him, everybody thought he was schizophrenic, so he ended up in a mental institute, and he had shock therapy until eventually one day he escaped and found this missing girl that nobody could find. And so people started to believe in him. So then he's become a paranormal detective. So he shows up because God sends him to this obscure sanctuary in upstate New York, and then all of a sudden this guy comes. I don't know, getting too much. So he ends up like being the mentor, and he's completely lost. He's like, I don't know why I'm here, and he's a curmudgeon, and it's funny, and the angel will show, and he hates the angel because they've had like fights, and he'll give you the speech on how somebody has to sacrifice. Bull crap, somebody has to sacrifice. Don't listen to him. So there's like this whole. So I threw that on its head where the angel's always late.
Fun. I like that a lot.
It was fun. So
it's very fun.
Yeah.
That's delightful. No, I love when you take tropes and subvert them in a fun way. That's just the best, It
is. It's fun. Everybody.
So
I love Gandalf. I love Obi-Wan. And then Obi-Wan in some ways is a turning on its head too because he fails.
Exactly.
But but I love that. Mentor chosen one and being like, oh, what if he didn't show up? What if he's like late?
What if he's bad at his job?
Right. What if he stinks? And not only that, he's an angel. Like he stinks at this part. Now he's good at other stuff, but he stinks at that part. It's like, he shows up late. He's wrong. He's like, I'm sorry, I got held up over here. And you got stuck with this guy instead. and it's like, it's just fun. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to write. And I didn't expect it because I was like writing and I'm a pantser. So I'm letting the characters tell me what's going on. And so I'm like, wait a minute, this is happening. He's becoming justice. The angel though is over here. Like, am I going to just, MacGuffin him over, I'm teleporting over, but he's fighting over here. So I can't just like, boop, I'm going to go over here, and I'm like, so what do I got to do? And I'm like, wait a minute, I have this character and I was going to write a story about him anyway. I'll pop him in here just for fun for a little while. And he ended up becoming like one of the best characters in the book. He's my favorite character in the book. He's my favorite character to write. He's in the second book right in the beginning, and I love writing him. He's in like a hospital room, and he's wearing like the normal hospital gown while vampires are attacking him, and it's just funny. He's just fun. It's just a lot of fun.
That's awesome. When that happens organically as a writer, it's such a beautiful process,
isn't it?
It's so great.
Yeah, Neil
it's
Gaiman
amazing.
calls that like your compost heap. Like everything that you read and intake like goes into your compost heap. And so don't like not being afraid to like pull out a character that you might have had for another story and stick them in here if they fit, and letting characters evolve. That's why I like to pants as well when I'm writing, because it's really cool to let a character tell you how they're going to act by like what they need to be able to do, like what their function is in the story.
Exactly.
And the cool thing is like when that changes the story around it, or when it makes it more like when it makes it more personal, that is such a like a like that's the kind of thing that readers relate to, I think. It's like,
Absolutely.
oh yeah, this person knows something because they need to know something because the author needs them to know something. Like, no, but if you have like, but if you do like the Slumdog Millionaire thing and you're like, well, this is why I know this, that is so much more impactful to your average reader or high level reader or fucking anybody who's just like, yeah, that like that felt earned. And that's one of the cool things about making a character like that.
Oh, absolutely. And my character's OP. I won't lie. And so, you know, I always had to be Superman. I always had to be the most powerful character. So when I created the character when we were kids, it was because he was more powerful than everybody else.
Nice.
So he's a Superman-esque on power level. And so you have to find out ways to tell the story and not have him be able to use those powers. Like I don't have a necessarily kryptonite.
Right.
But for me, it is the connection with the sword. The stronger the connection, the more power he's able to use. But the less the connection, the harder it is to use the power. And so it's that connection, and the fact that, particularly when you're starting out, so when he does reach the height of connection, he's like, there's nothing in the world that can stop him. Of course, he's then in essence Ghost Rider, where he's wandering around just bringing justice to everybody, and he's not really concerned with the greater mysteries or, you know, all of mankind's greater things. So this character, you know, as he becomes this, he's like, all right. And so what I want to play with later is, can the sword change? And so that's something that I want to see. That's the play. That's what I've kind of come to, is like, yes, okay, so do I just bring him here like all these other justices, and then he comes down, he dies? Or am I going to have the sword actually change? Can the sword change? It's a force of nature in a way, but can it change?
Well, so now as a reader, I want to know.
So, I mean, it's going to be a wild road,
but that's exciting.
Why are you a Claymore now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it can look like whatever it wants. So it turns into a locket at one point. It's, you know, because it wants you to pick it up. So it's when the bearer dies, the first bearer, who's called the Shogun. Of course, I just gave away part of the book. And it turns into a locket, and there's two cops, Dana and Jared, and Dana finds the locket, and for some reason, without thinking, puts it in her pocket. And so then she starts having nightmares about this dead character's life in ancient Japan. And so she doesn't know what's going on. She's crazy. She thinks she's going crazy because even though she is a Christian, quote unquote, in the book, because she's in love with the main character, Jared, who is a pastor's kid. They're both kind of like, yeah, we're Christians, we're raised Christians, but there's always this kind of like, you know, we're not pastors, we're not ministers, we're just doing our thing. You know, we believe in Jesus, but she's very much what I can see. So yes, I accept the concept of God, but the supernatural I need to see. And he, you know, so for her to then be dealing with this, wait a minute, these things are weird. Like there's stuff weird going on. This is not normal, you know, and then trying to explain it away on some level, but not being able to. And then of course, once the locket moves on to the rightful bearer, it's all kind of like, wait a minute, now I feel like something's lifted, you know, but then this kind of sets her off. So she's experiencing the supernatural, where Jared is just thrust, boom, you know, he's boom into supernatural. She's like experiencing these things subtly, trying to solve this mystery of what's going on around her. Is this real? Am I crazy? You know, so there's a bit of that with her. And then that's even going to come more so. It's like, I won't lie. I was a little bit of non-feminist with the character originally. It was like, you know, pine after the guy. I don't get him, you know? And so then, I'm heartbroken, blah, 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 you know, but she evolved. And it was like, thank God, because I was like, when I was thinking about it originally, I'm like, yeah, she's boring. you know.
Yeah.
She and no woman's gonna like her. And they're all gonna hate me because she's just, you know, this crybaby
because who
woman
is boring in real life?
Right.
I mean, everyone has their own
Exactly.
unique quality. Yeah. So
she begins to change in the story.
I know a
better.
couple people. I'm from Cowtown, Colorado. I know a couple
Okay.
people. Like
you know a couple boring people. Okay.
I
Fair
would
enough.
say
Fair enough.
I know boring people, but upstate New Yorkers are crazy. So they're weird. They're like the Southern hicks mixed with like Canadians. It's like this weird hybrid of weirdness. You know, they're hunting and wearing coonskin hats, and you know, it's just weird. And they say "eh" and they go up sometimes, and you're like, where did that come from? You're New Yorkers. You should, you know, be saying coffee. No, it's like weird.
oh
Weird.
man,
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
She definitely changed though, and actually opened up a whole third book that wasn't.
Oh, that's
originally on my
great.
plan.
That's
I was
awesome.
like,
Cool.
oh, I like that. You're going down a really dark path. I was like, wonderful. Because like and again, I'm a pantser, so I felt like she told me, like I'm writing the story, and I'm like, wait a minute. What if this happened to her? I'm like, and how would she handle this? Like, I had her crying too much, you know, and I'm like, nah, she wouldn't do that. She wouldn't cry herself to sleep all the time. Yeah, okay, a little bit, but she's like, no, she would go this way with this. And then if she's going this way already, would she go that far? And then I'm like, yeah, she would. I was like,
Nice.
and so it opened up a whole nother thing that I wanted to do. It's going to, again, open up a whole nother relational issue with the main character and what's right, what's wrong, what's justice, what's vengeance,
Wow.
you know. So anyway.
Well, Jason, where can our listeners find your book? Because I think everyone after listening to this is going to want to read it. So
Amazon.com. Right now I'm on Kindle Unlimited. You can get it on ebook, and you can get it, you know, print, trade. Well, it's not trade paperback, it's at 8.5. And you can find me at jwkiefer.com. I mean, I'm on Facebook, but I'm not really on there much. I just don't have a lot of time. So jwkiefer.com is my website, and I have a blog, although I haven't posted much lately, but I'm trying to keep up on that every, you know, once a week as well. And you can sign up for my newsletter there.
Oh, great. We'll definitely do that. And we love having you on the podcast. This was a great
Thank you.
talk.
Oh, I
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I
good luck
it.
with the rest of your writing today.
Thank
and
you.
we'd love to have
Thank
you on
you.
again another time. This is
Oh,
great.
definitely. Anytime.
Awesome. You have a
nice
good rest of your
man.
day. Thank you
You
for
too.
hosting, Carey. Appreciate you. And this has been Nerds and Friends. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.